Hi, I'm Karen and I'm the maths mum. I'm going to speak about maths and Down syndrome. So my first question is, why is it important for someone with Down syndrome to learn maths? Children and adults with Down syndrome need to understand maths to be able to live an independent life. They need to be able to understand money, time, weights and measures, and do simple calculations. We know that technology today can help them. We all have a calculator on our mobile phone. However, we need to still understand the basics of maths to understand that the answer that we get from a calculator is a sensible one. That if I add two numbers together, I get a sensible answer. And that is hugely important, and that is why it is essential that we give our children the building blocks to learn maths in a way that can give them the maths they need for life skills, to live independent lives. What are the key challenges in learning maths? Traditionally in school, maths is taught utilising memory. The use of long-term, short-term and working memory combines together in maths techniques. You can see the challenge because we know that Down syndrome is traditionally associated with a poor short-term memory. So we need to look at ways of adapting our learning techniques and our teaching techniques to compensate for poor short-term memory, but also to encourage things to go into our long-term memory, which we know is a strength. We also need to utilise visual memory because we know children with Down syndrome have got a good visual memory. So therefore using visual maths aids is key in the teaching of maths. Our children are achieving more and they are pushing out the boundaries. With early intervention, children are achieving and are expected to achieve more, and therefore it's important to understand and put things in place to actually enable them to be able to be taught maths in school. As the maths mum, I've got a professional and personal reason to encourage this to happen. My son Lance is 8 years old. He's currently in year 3 in mainstream school, and I am absolutely passionate that he's going to be taught the maths that he needs for his life. His maths for life, not necessarily for GCSE. When should I start teaching maths to my child? From birth. No, it's simple. Maths is all around us from an early age. Maths is naturally part of our everyday lives, and I would encourage it as much as possible with your children, just like everything else. In speech and language, one of the first things my son learnt to sign was the word more. More. More is a mathematical word. Okay, more than, less than. It is hugely important. So what I would say to you is maths should be built into your everyday life from the beginning. In nursery rhymes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, once I caught a fish alive, right through to counting. When you're putting things in front of your child, you should be counting them out. 1, 2, 3. The more verbal recognition they have of this idea of counting, the easier it will be to understand the concepts moving later through education. It is also important, and what comes before words are pre-number skills. So things like differentiating between colours. Which one is the blue car? Which one is the red car? Differentiating between sizes. Which one's big? Which one's small? All of these type of mathematical words can be introduced long before nursery, long before preschool, long before reception, and they should be part of your everyday routine. Look at what's around you. Look at the toy box. Look at what is the same and what is different in your laundry basket. Very good technique is matching socks. The idea behind this is the pre-school skills that you need, the pre-math skills or the pre-number skills are all built up of this idea of understanding different and the same. So understanding everything is red, understanding that blue is different to yellow, understanding shapes. Because it is hugely important when you ask the question, how many blue triangles are there, that the child knows what the colour blue is and what a triangle is, because you cannot answer the question without knowing those two facts. What is Numicon and why is it recommended for children with Down syndrome? Numicon is a maths aid. This is Numicon. Okay. It is a visual and sensory maths aid. And it was born out of special educational needs and developed to help children with special educational needs understand basic maths. However, these days, because of the more prevalence of children with special needs in mainstream education, it has been adapted by mainstream, and you will find it in most primary school classrooms these days, with a raft of other maths aids like my favourite, my number lines, place value maths, Dean's Cuisinaire rods, number squares. There are any amount of number aids that are visual. However, Numicon, for its use and functionality, has become one of the mainstays used for children with Down syndrome, and actively encouraged. There's lots of Numicon courses out there, and nowadays most primary school teachers and TAs will have an understanding of it. You can see why children with Down syndrome like it. It's very colourful, creates a lovely noise when dropped on the floor, and of course you can stick your fingers through it. Okay, but Numicon has got lots of things that you can actually use it for in basic building blocks for maths. Counting, so ordering, giving numbers, so this is 7, this is 10. Putting it in sequences, so actually putting it out in sequences and what comes next. Looking at one more than and one less than. Indeed, looking at odd and even. Yeah, what makes it odd, what makes it even. Ordering in comparison, which one's bigger, which one's smaller. Looking at less than, greater than. And then you can do simple subtraction. So if I have 10 and I take away 4, what am I left with? And indeed simple addition. If I have 6 and I add 4, what do I get? There is lots of uses for it, but it should not be used in isolation. Numicon is a maths aid. It aids the maths. And it is important that we move with Numicon into number recognition as well, and using other maths aids. Indeed, some children might be more comfortable using something like a number line, an early adapter of understanding the actual numerals. But it is a fantastic tool that was born out of special educational needs, which has now been adapted and used in mainstream schools. What are the key maths milestones? This is quite an interesting question because, like all milestones with children with Down syndrome, I am hesitant in listing things out because we know, just like all children, they develop in their own way, and some children might be more physical, they might be able to read quicker than they're doing maths. Some other children may be stronger in maths. Just like you do across the spectrum, we need to be very careful, but there are some key maths milestones that are important. There is the early counting, so the actual verbal counting, using the numbers like 1, 2, 3, even if it isn't a nursery rhyme. Then corresponding that counting to actual objects. So understanding the idea of cardinality, that there is an amount of something. So how many fish fingers have you got on your plate? I have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, this idea of a one-to-one correspondence, so that when I'm counting up 1, 2, 3, 4, and not just counting numbers and pointing willy-nilly, is hugely important. There is this holding the memory in your head. So one of the key things that we look at in young children when they're looking at maths is whether they can maintain the last number they've counted as the amount they have. So if you put 5 objects in front of them, ask them to count them, and they count up to 5, and then you ask them how many they have and they start counting again, they haven't understood that the count of 5 is actually how many that you have. I use a brilliant trick with my son, Lance, on this one, but when he counts up the number, I ask him to physically hold it in his head, okay? And it works, because the act of physically holding a number in his head encourages that short-term memory. It's an associative, it's a physical, and it works. Don't ask me, the science behind it, but I'm just giving you what works, and I've seen it work with other children, so I know it does. So then you go on to the number recognition, looking at numbers 1 to 10, being able to sort the numbers and sequence the numbers 1 to 10. Then moving on up through the teens. But just be warned, the teens are the hardest sequence of numbers to learn. It is actually sometimes easier to keep going from the teens and going up into the hundreds, because actually once you get past 20, the numbers become again quite sequential and quite poetic. You know that you can count up in a sequence. So don't stall somebody just because they can't get the teens. Move them on. Understanding place value, so understanding this idea of ones and tens and hundreds and how big a number is an important milestone. One more than, one less than. Number lines are absolutely fantastic for one more than, one less than, and looking at bigger and smaller numbers. Then you move on to the idea of simple addition and subtraction. The idea that you bring two things together and you create more, and then the idea that you have less when you take away something. I always encourage the use of concrete objects, so things, to do simple addition and subtraction initially, and through experience you should consider using things like Smarties, Cheerios, raisins, breadsticks, anything your child has gotten a fascination for with food. It works wonderfully in takeaway when they get to eat the takeaway. It is also important that they understand maths concepts. These are maths words like we talked about in the pre-number skills: size, shape, moving, direction. So it's hugely important they know what left and right is. They understand how to read and actually go from left to right and scan information. Obviously time and money and measure comes into everyday life, and it's going to be so important to understand those. There is lots of debate as to when it is most suitable, but I believe that if there is something in it for a child, if there is a reason for them to learn something, they will learn it. What I mean by that is the what's in it for me. Every child has a what's in it for me, and if you can negotiate, they will figure it out. So for instance, if they want to work out how to use the remote control because they want to switch the TV over to what they want to watch, they will figure it out. So if there's something in it for them, they will figure it out. So we've got to work on ways in which there's something in it for them when it comes to time and money. One of the things I always do on time is related to things that they know. And quite often when I'm asked, how long, I will quote it in a TV programme. Dinner will be in one Paw Patrol. We're going swimming in 2 Bings. The drive down to Granny's house will take 1 Alvin and the Chipmunks movie. You get my drift. But if you can relate maths to something that is important to them, it's so much easier to learn them. So the life skills of things like size, shape, movement, position, time and money, try and figure out a way to introduce that into life. Some examples of that might be, do you want a big or a small ice cream? Okay, you can have your snack at 3 o'clock. Set a clock at 3 o'clock and then get them to compare the clock on the wall. You can have 10 minutes of iPad before bed. Then set a timer so that it goes off in 10 minutes. It's a brilliant conceptual idea for understanding how long 10 minutes is, because quite often we get distracted, especially around bedtime, and it might end up being 30 minutes they have iPad. But the best thing to do is to relate it to things that they understand. You can spend £10 your grandmother gave you. You can buy 1 Paw Patrol figure, or you can have 3 Lego minifigures. It is hugely important that they see the value, that gets you 1, that gets you 3. And where possible, use real amounts. It's something that we use money less and less these days. So when we're talking about money, it's really appropriate we use appropriate amounts. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is when we go to the cinema, it costs almost £10 a ticket. So when we're talking about going to the cinema and we're talking about the cost of a ticket, we need to reference that it's £10. Maybe relate it to something that they know and love that they get. That would get you 20 chocolate bars, okay, because a chocolate bar is 50p. Should a child with Down syndrome follow the national curriculum for maths, or does it need to be differentiated? Again, just like all children, children with Down syndrome will have strengths and weaknesses. Some children will enjoy reading and excel at reading, and speech and language, they will be speaking. Some children will be challenged in other ways. Some children will get maths concepts and some will find it more difficult. You will need to assess what is best for your child with regard to the differentiated education. Lance gets maths concepts, but his work is completely differentiated and he is not working at peer appropriate maths. We have decided that it's more important for him to consolidate all his building blocks before moving onwards to more challenging maths. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is I want Lance to be secure in understanding of basic addition and subtraction before moving on to multiplication, grouping and sharing. The way that maths is taught traditionally in school is following a scheme of work. There are numerous schemes of work out there, but things like White Rose Maths, Power Maths, Maths No Problem, Shanghai Maths, and Numicon, ironically, is a scheme of work. Most mainstream schools will follow one of these, and this is the way in which lessons are taught. This is set year on year, and it will be quite specific. You will cover a topic, you will test on a topic, then you will leave a topic. You might revisit it later on in the year, but it is quite a lot of do the topic, test the topic, leave the topic, revisit the topic. This could mean that you may touch upon something like fractions 3 times a year. Now we know that children with Down syndrome learn better when it is repeated. So therefore, you could argue that the schemes of work followed by most schools aren't really suitable for our children to follow, because obviously if they spend a week doing fractions and they don't get it, they're not going to revisit it for another term. And by then, you will be starting again from scratch. So I would say that it is important to differentiate the maths learning for our children to make sure that when we're moving on, they have consolidated that learning. And that might mean spending longer on a topic or doing 2 or 3 topics in parallel but keep coming back to it. So it's that play off between ensuring repetition and ensuring they don't get bored and frustrated. Will my child be able to get a GCSE in maths? So my gut reaction here is to say, yes, of course, let's not put any limitations on anyone. And I would hope that someday soon, children with Down syndrome are attaining GCSE maths. However, that said, I've spent quite a long time looking at the curriculum of GCSE maths and looking at the skill sets of children with Down syndrome, and there is a disparity. There is quite a significant chunk of GCSE maths which has got topics that are not relevant for maths for life. They are things like quadratic equations, things like the nth sequence, things like graphs, graphical representation. It forms quite a big chunk of the actual curriculum, and part of me is not wanting to discourage you, but to say that I'm not sure the path of GCSE maths is the right and correct path for children with Down syndrome if you want to secure them in the maths for life. I've been doing lots of investigation and putting a lot of thought into this over the last 9 months because I've been approached by some parents of children moving into the secondary level education and looking at a route for them that will secure them maths for life. And I've been investigating functional skills. Functional skills is a set of maths qualifications that the government set out to get adults back into education, a way of being able to get a qualification or to go on to tertiary level education by gaining a maths qualification when you haven't got a GCSE in maths. But the actual functional skills curriculum is much more set in maths for life and much more suitable for an attainment for our children. I'm working currently on a project to look at what would need to be learned for each level of functional level maths, and looking at a scheme of work for a school and a teaching assistant to follow with a child to actually put them on that path. It's quite interesting work, but I definitely do think that it's something to be investigated, because definitely the actual maths that are involved in functional skills is much more suitable to our children, much more practical, and is definitely based on that idea of independent living. That's not to say in my heart I am truly hoping that I see children with Down syndrome attaining GCSE maths in the future. I would hope that that is where they're going to. Although it might not be at age 16, but if children do get it and are getting maths concepts, we may need to look at the fact that maybe sometime in later life, maybe when they're 18, maybe when they're 24, they can sit a GCSE maths if they continue their learning. So in summary, maths should be part of everyday life. The more that maths is friendly to our children, the more they will accept it and not feel threatened by it. The more that we can engage with them in mathematical vocabulary, the more that they will find it non-threatening. The what's in it for them is hugely important. If you can find out a way to make it relevant to them to understand it, they will understand it. And let's not set limitations on our children. The building blocks are hugely important, and hopefully some of our children will excel like they are excelling all around the world to actually achieve greater and bigger things in maths. And as the maths mum, as I said, I have a professional and personal interest in making sure that we create a way to teach our children successfully to attain those math skills for life, to give them the quality and independent lives they deserve.